Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carmen Yetzi Mazzara, and I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. I'm so pleased to welcome you to day 4 of our Public and International Service PISA Advisor Training, where today we'll be talking about helping students prepare and pay for graduate school. And I'm so excited to have some of my colleagues here from a wide range of graduate school programs that can share their wisdom with you and answer all of your questions. As those of you who've been able to join us for other sessions this week know, PISA is a network of advisors across the US who help and support each other as we try to build up a series of champions on campuses for public and international service. And so we're so glad to have you all here as part of this conversation, and we look forward to having you in the PISA community going forward. We're also grateful to the Robertson Foundation for Government, whose investments make these kinds of trainings possible, and to our colleagues who take the time out of their day to share their insights with all of us. We have one last session tomorrow that's looking at APSIA and PISA and what we can do for you to help make this a little easier and smoother on your campus. And we have all of the recordings of our past sessions that are available currently on the APSIA YouTube page. So we certainly hope you'll be able to check that content out if you weren't able to be there live and in person. If you have questions about this week and you have questions about our speakers, in the chat, I've just thrown the link to the program for the week. So feel free to consult that to learn more about our speakers that have been part of this whole series of workshops. And with that, I'm very pleased to turn the floor over to Rodia Vance, who will be introducing our session and leading us through this conversation. So with that, please, Rodia.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Good afternoon, good morning, morning or afternoon. I'm on the East Coast, so I get confused. To everyone, so happy that you all are able to be with us today for this very important topic, where we are talking about how do we get our students in a space where they are both prepared in terms of knowing what to do for these programs that they want to get into in the areas of international affairs and public affairs, but also how to pay for it. So it's one thing to teach them how to get in. It's another thing to prepare them for when they get right, because those student loans are going to come due. They are going to, have to figure out how to survive and to live on the salaries that they earn. And so we are going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm very excited to introduce to you our 3 very wonderful panelists that we have with us. I will start with Jeanette. Jeanette DeFlorimonte is the Director of Admissions at the Master of Science program in Foreign Service at Georgetown University's Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service. She is responsible for all matters pertaining to recruitment, to admissions, scholarships, and advertising. And she meets with prospective students, counsels applicants, and works with admissions committees in making admissions decisions. So she's a good person to know, I would say. She also designs and implements their annual outreach strategy for their domestic and international recruitment through travel, and she also works closely with the graduate school in the management of their applications there and awarding of merit-based scholarships. We also have with us Adelaide Isaacs, who is the manager of global admissions and enrollment at the IE University School of Global and Public Affairs. She has been there since July of 2019 and holds a master's degree in international relations from the IE school, and also a master's degree in Hispanic studies and linguistics from Auburn University, and a bachelor's in Spanish language and literature, also from Auburn University. Before joining IE, Adelaide worked for the Spanish Ministry of Education in Madrid and as a professor of Spanish language at Auburn. She's very passionate about culture, about language, politics, and education. And then last but certainly not least, we have with us Jessica Pan, Director of the MPP Admissions and Scholarships Program at Duke University's Sanford School of Public Policy. She has served there since 2010, and helping to build a community pursuing innovative policy solutions to create positive change. Previously, she served as the Associate Director of Admissions for the Master of Science in Foreign Service at Georgetown University, and has earned a Master of Arts in English from Georgetown as well. So I want to start by thanking all of our panelists for their time with us today, and looking forward to all of the information that they're going to share with us. So before we jump in, I do want to invite everybody, if you're comfortable or in a space to do so, feel free to turn your cameras on. We'd love to see your smiling faces, but if not, then we can certainly know that you're just listening in and hopefully taking some great notes while you're at it. So let's go ahead and dive in. I thought we would start with kind of a big picture question, right? This whole week we've been talking about the importance of international affairs, graduate school and public affairs, and getting our students to understand what careers can come from these programs, what kind of work and impact they can have in the world. So to sort of address that in a big picture way, I wanted to ask all of our panelists if they would share with us what their thoughts are and just what role does graduate school play in professional success. And, you know, I guess some sub questions there. How would an advisor know whether to recommend graduate school for their student, or what kinds of programs might be the best fit for their students? And Adelaide, I see you shaking your head, so we'll go ahead and start with you, and then I'll come to the other panelists.
Thanks, Rodia. Yes, so I think a big factor to take into account, probably the most important, is kind of the career goal of the student. We've seen in our European space, IU is located in Madrid, that for a lot of international organizations and for a lot of public sector positions, a master's degree is a requirement. They won't even consider your application to a lot of those positions without a master's degree in a related field. So for us, when a student comes to us and says, no, I really want to work for my domestic government, I'm really interested in a position with the World Bank, with the UN, with the OECD, that's a pretty good indicator that they're going to need to pursue some type of graduate studies just to even have a fighting chance at some of those positions. Otherwise, a lot of positions in the private sector are a little bit more flexible, a little bit more agile, as we all know, I think. So that's not necessarily a must-have as much for students who are more interested in staying in the private sector. But we've definitely seen, at least in the European space, that a master's degree is a must-have for most public sector and kind of international organization positions.
Yeah, so I would echo what Adelaide said in terms of students figuring out what it is they want to do before you decide to tell them that they should pursue a graduate degree. There certainly are people who can be successful in these spaces with just a bachelor's degree. But the thing that you want to look at is kind of what they'd like to do and what people who are doing that currently, what they have in terms of their education. And so, I mean, a master's degree certainly won't hurt. And if they like to further their career, that's something that they may need to do eventually. So also determining when the best time is for them to do that. I don't know if we're gonna talk about that as much here, but for a lot of our programs, they're more professionally focused. And so we're looking for students to have a little bit of work experience prior to coming into graduate school. So it may not be something that they're looking at initially upon graduation, but something that they should be considering in their future and have that in their sights as they're looking for their first job out of undergraduate.
Yeah, I agree with what my colleagues have said here. So certainly the very first question is just, is the degree necessary for their career goals? And, you know, a lot of that is related to their target occupation, what specific skills you need, what specific degrees are necessary. I would say I also echo the one piece of advice that I always recommend is that for the types of employers and roles that they're interested in, to take a look at what types of degrees that a lot of their employees have. This doesn't mean that that is absolutely what you have to have, but it gives you a good sense of what that employer hires for and who is there. Maybe they are looking for a different type of degree to complement rather than more of the same. But I think it can help at least give you a good sense, if everyone at that employer has a master's, and if it's specifically in IR or public policy or related fields, that's probably a good indication that might be very well something that is highly valued there. I think sometimes even your target location, if you have geographical preferences of where you want to work, I sort of feel like in DC, the master's degree is like the new bachelor's degree. Like everyone has it. Like if you're gonna probably need it at some point. Like for most jobs there, at some point when you want the next one, they're probably gonna require it. So I feel like if you're in DC or you're planning to work in DC one day, you're probably going to need a master's degree at some point. And then thinking about your desired skill set, whether it's hard skills or soft skills, the type of occupation that you want to do, do you need policy analysis, data analysis, quantitative coursework? Is it knowledge expertise? I feel like a lot of students who come to our program, they come for sort of one of two reasons or both reasons combined. They've either hit a ceiling where the job description of their next desired job requires a master's degree, like we already talked about, or they realize that they need to either obtain or improve or expand their skill set or knowledge, or a combination of these things. So yeah, a lot of that, I think my colleagues and I agree on all of those aspects.
Jessica, you brought up an interesting point talking about location. I know this is something I do talk about with students a lot in terms of, putting their list of schools together about where they want to apply. Do they have specific preferences around where they'd like to be, the kind of environment they want to be in? Are you a person who's a big city cosmopolitan person, or do you like, things a little more, out in the burbs or something like that? But thinking about the location of a school from the standpoint of what impact that might have on maybe career outcomes, is that something that might be a possibility, or is it something where, all programs sort of have their ways to move their graduates wherever they would want to be? And I'll open that up to any of our panelists.
I have a lot to say on this topic, so I guess I can start us off, and then my colleagues are happy to have them join in. But I think that one important thing to think about that I kind of wish I could just announce to all students who are thinking about grad school at some point, and specifically in this field, is that when you're thinking about your total cost for attending grad school and you're calculating those numbers, the cost of living, based on location of where you're going to school, might be the financial factor that you have the most control over, right? Like tuition is going to cost what it's going to cost. Hopefully you get a good scholarship, and we all hope that, advocate for that every day. But where you end up going to grad school and the cost of living of that area can very much be a significant difference, just depending on where you physically are, right? So if you're going to get a good education at any of these schools, at any APSIA school, you're set. But that's a big piece that could easily save you over $20,000 over the course of 2 years. Living in Durham versus DC, and I've lived in both areas, both cities now, you will easily save over $20,000 during those 2 years just on your rent alone, much less all the other daily living costs and things like that. So I think it's something that, people think about it sort of tangentially in their mind, but maybe not as significantly as they should. Like when you're doing your spreadsheets and putting out all the calculations, make sure you're factoring the cost of living over that 2 years or 2 years plus if you're doing a dual degree, to make sure, it's not comparing apples to apples if two schools give you the same scholarship, because you're not factoring in the cost of living that you're going to have to pay over those 2 years. I also kind of always want to say that I think, having been in this sort of advising role for so long, there's kind of the expectations of grad school versus the reality of grad school that I think a lot of people don't think enough about. So I would say that maybe contrary to popular belief of what grad students think might happen during grad school, I would say they have very little free time during grad school. Like if they're very rigorous programs, you're quite busy. And so you probably will have less free time than you think you might. And when you do have free time, you might have not much money to spend in that free time. So I say this because a lot of students, I feel like, make their important decision of where they want to go to grad school based on the location and city. You know, sometimes the big cities are the draw. They're exciting, there's tons to do, all that stuff, which I would argue certainly is true for Duke and Durham as well. But I think that they make these decisions based on expectations or assumptions that don't pan out in reality. So then once they actually get to grad school, they don't have a lot of free time. When they have free time, they don't have money to go do all these things that they think they might want to do. So just keeping that also in mind. And then that part, you know, location-wise, I would say DC schools, and having, of course, been at Georgetown previously, both for my own grad school and at MSFS, you know, DC schools obviously emphasize the importance of being in DC. And I did the same thing when I was at Georgetown. I'm like, being in DC is so important. I think it is important when location is important when you are taking advantage of it. So when you're doing your summer internship, when you have those networking opportunities, then it is. So like, you know, a lot of our students intern in DC over the summer. However, I think when you're not interning during the academic year, which is the truth for our students and a lot of other fellow APSIA schools, then you are just paying an expensive overhead for the higher cost of living in that city. So, you know, I think it is important to be in the right location to give you the opportunities that you want, the networking opportunities, the specific internship or other job opportunities when it matters. But then I think, you know, I guess for our students, they kind of luck out with having the benefit of they go there when it matters, but then they don't pay as high of a overhead cost for living, you know, the rest of the year during the whole academic year when they're just taking coursework. And I think sometimes it's more important than the physical location of the school might be the location of its alumni network. And so, you know, for example, our highest alumni concentration of alumni for us is in DC, right? So we're not physically located in DC, but that's where most of our alums are, at least the highest concentration. So I think that can be an important thing to consider as well. And then finally, we talked a little bit about geographical preferences of your career goals. And so I would say, you know, as you're advising students, you know, if they have specific preferences of where they want to end up living and where they want to end up working, whether it's East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, or internationally, whether they want to work in local or state government versus federal government, that might come into play as well as far as what is a good decision for you to go to grad school, right? Like if someone is out in California and they really want to work in local or state government, it probably does make sense for them to go out to school in California to have that network and make those connections and be familiar with policies in those areas. Whereas if they were looking for federal government and to go to DC, you know, that might be a different story. So I think all of those things play into the location, the impact of location.
Fabulous. Adelaide, I know you're in Europe. Any different thoughts on that?
Yes. So I think a lot of students get very intimidated at the thought of Europe. It sounds very expensive and exotic. It really isn't. Madrid is probably on par with what you would pay in a Durham. Actually, I pay less now in Madrid than I did at Auburn, which is rural Alabama. So there really are some very affordable options in Europe. And especially when you're looking at an international career, there is a big competitive advantage to having kind of left your domestic space, interacted with classmates from other countries, and then even returning to work in US government. There's quite a competitive advantage with having an international network. So obviously, if you're looking at a London School of Economics in central London or a Sciences Po in Paris, you're going to be paying New York, DC prices. But you have a couple of options also in Spain with IE, in Germany with Hertie School that are really, really great schools, because I think we can all agree that in terms of academic theory, we're probably going to be seeing more or less the same things, whether you're in DC, New York, Austin, Texas, or Madrid, Spain. We're going to have pretty similar academic base knowledge. So I agree with Jessica a lot that I think that network is really kind of what you're paying for. That's going to be one of the most competitive things in my experience and opinion. I saw in the chat, Malia was asking about, you know, network versus kind of network and location versus school. So I would almost always vote for network and location. And I think Jessica touched on something interesting too, that with the alumni network, that, you know, sometimes your network and location is more about your classmates and the alumni reach than it is about the city that your university is located in. So that's something also to take into account, i.e. we have a super international network because that's, you know, one of our kind of university core values is diversity. And so we really like to mix, you know, China, Saudi Arabia. The Hertie School is in Germany. Sorry, I just saw in the chat. Yes, thank you. So that's also something to take into account, is kind of the diversity within your cohort if you're looking for an international network, and then also where your alumni are located, because a lot of times that's going to be kind of your sneaky in route to some really cool opportunities that may not have necessarily been open to you as just an organic applicant, but with kind of a little bit of that alumni connection, sometimes some really cool doors can open.
Awesome. Jeanette, I wanted to pose this next question to you first, because as an advisor, I think the main thing that our applicants are coming to ask us, which is, okay, what are the schools looking for? I get this question all day long, what internships look good? What, classes, what things should I do? What do the schools want? And my immediate reaction to that is always, well, okay, but what do you want? What do you want to put forward to the school? So I'm curious, and I'll start with you on this question about, what is it that makes an applicant pop to you as you guys are reviewing applications? And what should we as advisors know in terms of coaching our students through that process of preparing for putting together a very solid portfolio and application to be that competitive applicant?
Well, I will say that your advice is spot on. It really, the first question, even when they come to us and they're like, what are you guys looking for? It's like, well, what is it that you want? You'll hear from these 3 different schools and that we all have a little bit of a different kind of personality. And I think that there's a personality fit for every applicant. And so that is the most important thing, where what we don't want is to read an application where you've heard us say, we like these 3 things, and you like talk about these 3 things and they aren't really your passion. It's very clear they're not your passion, but you're trying to fit them in just so that you think that this is what we want to hear. So I would say one of the things that applicants really need to have really is a sense of self, like self-awareness, I think is the biggest thing. So even if your internship isn't directly related to what you think we want, if you're able to pull those transferable skills out of your experience and explain how they will help guide you towards what you'd like to be at the end of your graduate school career, I think that is what we're looking for. Understanding what the applicant trajectory is and how we can assist them in getting there. And an example of that, which students always ask me, like, well, what if I have a job? And there's an application that is really memorable to me because it kind of explains this. So we had an applicant who went to a state school in the Midwest. He majored in international relations. He did, the requisite internships while he was in undergrad, some local governments. He did 1 summer at the UN, and then he graduated and he moved back home to his small town, and there weren't a lot of IR jobs there. So he took a job at the zoo. And then he applied to our school, and I was like, well, how did he make that change from working at a zoo to going to Georgetown? And the thing was that he was really creative in his statement of purpose. And he explained how working in the zoo with the different departments and kind of like the different animals, he made a parallel to his experience working at the UN during the summer with the different agencies and how they interacted in negotiating and being diplomatic and all working towards the same goal. So he was able to take those transferable skills from his experience, which on the surface doesn't look related, to be able to explain what it is he'd like to do at the end and how he was able to build off of the things that he was able to do to get to his final goal. Ultimately, he wanted to work in the State Department. And so that's what we're looking for really as students. It doesn't really matter what you've done in the past, as long as you're clear in terms of what it is you'd like to do at the end and how the things that you've done since then will help you to get there. You're muted, so.
That's become like the tagline of 2020. You're muted. Anything to add from our other panelists was what I was asking.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think a lot of APSIA schools strongly prefer full-time work experience from their students. So having, probably at least 1 year, but more like 2. Our students often have between 2 to 4 years on average of a full-time work experience before entering, is a good thing. And really, this is in the best interest of the student. This is so that you are sort of getting your feet wet. Whatever it is you think you want to do, go out and do it. Like try to start doing it so that you can make sure that it is the right thing you want to do, because you can never know until you actually start doing it, right? So as far as what kind of, I get the question a lot, like, what kind of jobs should I be looking at? What kind of jobs do you want me to have? And again, it's the same thing where you throw it back to them, where it's like, what kind of jobs do you want to have, right? And that's where we start. That's the starting point. And so, when you write your statement of purpose and you're telling us about your academic background and your professional goals, and these are the things that interest you, our hope is that you start doing these things and trying, at some entry-level jobs, like maybe 1 or 2, to kind of make sure that the reality aligns with, I guess, kind of your expectations of what you thought this kind of job does, and whether it is a good fit for you. Having that work experience will give you a really good sense of the things you do like about it, the things that you don't like about it, and kind of what you want to focus on during your time in grad school. So I would say that most of our students do have full-time work experience coming in. We do have a very small percentage of the students that come directly from undergrad, but I would say that even if you were to ask them when they're graduating, even though they had a great experience, loved their time, and absolutely recommend it, I think even they would agree that had they had some full-time work experience before going to grad school, they would have gotten infinitely more out of grad school and the experience than they did. They got a lot out of it for sure, but they would have gotten even more out of that. Because these are sort of professional degrees, having that context of having worked, having that practical work experience before you come in really helps to contextualize everything that you're learning, and it brings so much to the classroom and to the classroom discussion. So this really is in the best interest of the student. So having that, highly recommending that at least getting, minimum, probably at least a year of full-time work experience probably is in your best interest. And then some other things, for those who are still in undergrad, since obviously there are a lot of undergrad advisors, a lot of these schools may have some prerequisite coursework. So things like, for us, it's microeconomics and statistics, but for Georgetown, it might be macroeconomics and foreign language requirement and things like that. So maybe start, even if they don't know exactly which program they might be interested in, or they're starting the process of looking, just sort of planting the seed of like, hey, when you start looking at these programs, take a look at what prerequisites they might have, so that if you're still an undergrad and still have time to take microeconomics, macroeconomics, or foreign language, or calculus is helpful too for us, even though it's not required. This type of coursework, this type of quantitative preparation it will be really helpful for you later on. And I would say this, as strong as you can come in on the quantitative side, will really help you during your time in the program as well. I feel like students who struggle the most, it tends to be on the quantitative side. So having that introductory background coming in, and then you don't need to worry about it later on. You've graduated and then you need to figure out how to take these courses, that kind of thing. So maybe looking at that as well. Certainly looking at standardized testing requirements. I know a lot of my colleagues in schools may have gone GRE optional this year. We did for the first time. We are planning to keep it GRE optional. I don't know, some schools that will be their own decision, right? So just checking in on what their more updated requirements are regarding standardized testing. And then as far as letters of recommendation, if they're thinking about grad school down the line and they're thinking about taking our advice of working full-time first, I would try to keep in touch maybe with some academic references. So professors that they've had multiple courses or did like an honors thesis with, or, just professors who know them really well, can really speak to their abilities in the classroom. to just, even if this is just an annual update or just trying to keep in touch a little bit to keep that line open for when they do have that ask later on in say 2 years from now, and they're applying to grad school and they need that letter of rec. It's not this sort of cold call, like they've at least tangentially kept in touch, and it's not out of nowhere, out of the blue. And you have a little bit of, you can get some buy-in from these professors early on of what do you recommend? What is your advice? What schools do you, would you recommend I look at? And these are really good relationships, I think, to mentor relationships to have regardless. And then in writing those letters or choosing who to write those letters of rec, I'd also say to choose references who know you really well, and over people with really impressive titles, right? Like choosing the CEO who knows nothing about you and writes like 2 sentences in your letter of recommendation is not helpful at all. So much better than that would be to choose that, the person, the professor or the supervisor, the direct supervisor who knows you really well and can really speak in detail about you. And then I guess my last piece of advice would just be when you're actually applying to the different grad schools to engage and really show your level of interest, go to their recruiting events, do like a virtual visit, or hopefully by then maybe in-person campus visits, and show them that interest level. Sometimes I really wonder why some applicants even apply, because it seems like their interest is very, tangential and minimal. And that, goes into when I'm making decisions, that goes into my thinking process as well. How likely are they to actually enroll if I admit this person? So, participating, engaging, and showing your interest is helpful too.
Great. So to our other 2 panelists, Jessica just mentioned, sort of those check boxes that we're ticking as an applicant is working on the application. And I'm sure there are advisors here who might be advising students for different kinds of grad programs at the same time, like I do. What would you say are some of the most significant differences between a grad school application for, public and international service versus law school or some other sort of tangential area that maybe students are trying to decide between? What would be some things that they need to think about for this application, but not maybe for those others?
I can start. So for us, I know that the biggest ones that students ask us about are maybe like so at the School of Foreign Service, we don't have a PhD program. So we often get students who want to go into international affairs and are looking at maybe some of the PhD programs and other institutions and how we differ. And I would say that we are a practitioner degree, and I think this is true for my colleagues here as well. And so we're looking to get students into the workforce. I know that the one that they mostly compare us to would be like the political science maybe, or government. And I would say those are a little more theoretical. And so you're looking at concepts and comparing ideas, whereas we're preparing you with practical skills. So public speaking, instead of writing instead of writing chapters in books, you're writing memos and briefs that you'll be able to hand in and use on the ground in work. And so depending on if they want to go into academia, I would say maybe look at one of the other programs. I mean, we definitely have graduates who go into academia, but they usually go into the workforce first before they come back and do that. And so we're really looking to train students to get into the workforce with practical skills.
Great. Adelaide, anything to add to that?
Totally. So from our side, I actually manage the international law program in our law school. So I can kind of speak super clearly on the differences between kind of what we're looking for. But I think my colleagues nailed it for sure. At least for us, we're putting a much higher priority on kind of those soft skills in the application. So we're looking at a candidate that speaks multiple languages, that has international experience, that has experience kind of navigating, a more international relations diplomatic space. Versus in the law school, we're probably going to be a little bit more hard and fast on that LSAT score or on the GRE. We're going to look for more of those kind of hard skills versus where in international affairs, we're a little bit more flexible and we can kind of balance out some of those applications when candidates have excellent internship experiences with the UN or with the World Bank or something like that. And when they have some of those kind of more heavily developed soft skills that are going to serve them well in a position later on in government or in public service.
Great. So I'm again biased because I'm a pre-law advisor here, but I get this question a lot with my students between that, law, public policy, public administration, international affairs, international relations, that whole like continuum. And they're trying to figure out which way are they going to be able to make the most impact? What's going to prepare them? In your opinion, and I'll pose this to all of the panelists, with all these different ways that an applicant could go about getting towards the career that they want to get to, what, in your view, makes international affairs and policy the sort of right direction for a person versus some other type of degree program?
Well, at least in the case of IE, our law school is super, super focused on business law. So you're going into the private sector for sure. There's almost no law module or add-on that we have that's really focused on public sector law, because we do have so many international students. So it just doesn't make sense for us to focus on, Spanish domestic, like we're very focused on Spanish domestic law and international business. So we have a bit of trade and something like that. But for a student who's interested more in international affairs, global and public affairs, they probably have a career goal that's more focused on the international space, on diplomacy, on governance, versus our law candidates tend to be Spanish nationals. With an undergraduate degree in law from a Spanish school that want to practice law in Spain. So for us, it's a super easy differentiation to make, but I'm sure for Duke and Georgetown, it's a little bit trickier. Probably there's more overlap maybe.
Well, I want to first say that with the fields of like IR and public policy, there's so many different, the degrees are called so many different things that it can certainly be very confusing, and we completely agree. Whereas, with MBA, JD, MD, those are very specific. There's one name, everyone knows what that is, and it's very clear, and maybe it's quite clear what they do, what you go on to do, as far as career outcomes with those kinds of degrees too. So I think the tough thing with IR, public policy degrees with these APSIA schools, especially since many schools don't offer these as undergrad majors, and then also because, and suddenly in grad school, it's an option, and how were you supposed to know about this? And when were you supposed to learn about this and know that it was an option? And how are you supposed to prepare for it, right? And then the career outcomes are so varied, like whatever someone asks, what is like a typical career outcome of an MPP or, an IR degree, it's like everything under the sun probably our alumni have gone on to do. And so one thing I really advise is there's so many acronyms for similar type programs. There's the MSFS, there's the MPP, MPA, the MALD program, the MALD, the MA and IR, MIA. These are all similar programs though. And so I just say, my advice is to focus really on the core curriculum of the specific programs that you're looking at, and really think about what skills are the most important to you. Like, why are you going back to graduate school? What are the hard and soft skills that you want to have by the time you leave, or the knowledge gaps that you want to fill? We could spend 20 minutes, which I won't, going into like MPP versus MPA. What's the difference? There's a historical difference, but there's a lot of overlap that has happened over time. For example, Princeton's our equivalent, sort of the MPP equivalent at Princeton is actually called an MPA. It's closer to their MPA than their MPP. So forget about the acronym, forget about the actual words and names, focus on the core curriculum. What are the courses? What are the skills? What do they teach? What is important to them? I specifically say the core because since that's mandatory for all students, clearly those courses are very important to that specific school. Like that is the heart of their degree. So for us, policy analysis, data analysis, leadership ethics, these kinds of courses, everybody has to take. So clearly we highly value these things and think that everyone needs them. And then, as they're thinking about whether they're thinking about dual degrees or trying to decide between degrees, is it law school, is it business school, what is the right one? Because we certainly have students who apply either to duals or individually and then see what happens and then decide. My one question I always ask is that, do you need, if for dual degrees, I ask, do you need the dual degree? For your career goals, what are your career goals? Make sure there's a specific real reason that you feel like you need this degree, not just I'm interested. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. If school is free and everyone could, it didn't matter, then obviously go for it. But knowing there's certainly a return on investment, it's a lot of money you're probably talking about. It's time investment, all of that. Do you need it for the job that you want? And so, for law school, you can certainly refute what I'm about to say, but what we often advise is, the first question I sort of ask someone is, do you actually want to practice as an attorney? Are you planning to practice as an attorney for at least a good number of years once you graduate? Because if you're not, it might not be the best return on investment for you in the climate. There's a lot of lawyers out there. There's a very oversaturated market. If you just have an interest in law, maybe do, and policy is IR is your primary focus, do that. Take electives to the law school. You can take like up to 4 classes at the law school as part of just getting our MPP degree. And so, do you need it? Do you have a real career reason? Are you planning to practice law? Do you want to start your own business? These are real reasons why you maybe should or shouldn't get the law degree, the MBA. And then I focus on the core curriculum, because for us, if it's the core curriculum of the school that interests you, you do have to be that school student. If it's elective courses that you're interested in, you do not have to be that school student. You can take those, as not, you can take a law school course, you can take a business school course, you can go elsewhere to take those elective courses, but you cannot take other schools' core curriculum. And so that's why I focus a lot on what is that core curriculum, what are those classes, how important are they to you, and then use that as a gauge for, whether you may or may not need that degree for your career goals.
Thank you. I do want to hop back really quickly. I missed a question here in the chat regarding recommendations that I think is important to clarify. So Belinda asks, for recommendations for students whose best relationships are with non-teachers or non-teaching staff at their university, maybe administrators for whom they've worked, or coaches, things like that, advisors for extracurricular activities. Would those letters be sufficient, or how important is it to have the faculty recommendation?
For us, I would say, you're allowed to have multiple letters of recommendation, but I think it's important to have a faculty member, because if you have someone who's a little tangential, the question is going to be, why don't you have a faculty member? That's usually the question. Were you not a good student? What are the reasons that you don't have a good relationship with someone that you are in class with, especially because a lot of the classes at the graduate level are seminar style, where you're asked to participate in the class. It's not so much just, memorizing and taking tests, but a lot of it is communication and interacting, especially because our degrees are basically leading to like diplomacy and interaction. And we want to know how you interact with these people who a lot of times may be practitioners, who are in the field that you want to go into. So it is important to have at least one academic reference from a faculty member. But if they take some time off and they've been working, it's totally acceptable to have, professional letters as well. But you do still want to have at least one, I think, faculty member.
All right, great. Thank you so much.
For us as well, I would agree. I think there is value added in including a coach or an extracurricular, a volunteer supervisor, for example. They can kind of speak to some of those soft skills, which are great, and for us at least are a high priority when we're evaluating applicants. So if they can speak to your teamwork abilities, or to your leadership qualities, or to your organizational motivation, that's awesome. But I agree with Jeanette that an academic reference or a professional reference is also it needs to be complemented. It shouldn't be, 2 coaches and no academics. It should definitely be 1 and 1 if you're going to do it that way.
All right, great. So the big question, how do we pay for all of this? How do we do it? I think many of us on this call probably know as advisors, or have heard at least of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And there's some questions with that right now as to how applicable it will be for everyone. So we want to talk about some other ways potentially. I think we will drop a link in the chat. Thank you, Carmen. For those who do want to read up a little bit on PSLF, if you're not familiar with that, I would definitely say to get familiar with it, as it may apply for some of your students. But we also want to talk a little bit about merit-based aid, which comes directly from the schools. And so we'll start with Jessica. You know, what about the individual school-based scholarship monies, whether that's merit-based aid or potentially some sort of named scholarship or fellowship program? How should applicants be more focused on obtaining those types of awards versus maybe, you know, depending on PSLF down the road?
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk a little bit about our specific scholarships at Duke and our MPP program. So one thing I am really grateful for, and I continue to advocate daily for more increased scholarship funding, but right now, all of our admitted students receive a merit-based scholarship, at least, you know, ranging from partial to full, if they're not already fully funded through an external organization, which sometimes a small percentage of students are. And so for us, the average student receives just about a 50% tuition scholarship, which is super helpful for them. I know, you know, Duke is a private school, it's expensive for sure. So that at least helps, you know, everyone. We can help everyone at least a little, if not a lot. And I'm grateful for that. And I hope that only continues to increase. We have a few specific fellowships that I've worked really, really hard for over the past 11 years to have that provide. There's very few of them, but there's a few that provide sort of that full tuition, and then worked especially hard to get a living stipend for a few of these as well. So we have one that we call our Sanford Family Fellowship. This is for folks who are committed to working with underserved communities. So they both show this in their professional background, and then in their future career goals that they tell us that they want to continue working with underserved communities. You have the Sanford Family Fellowship. So again, that one actually is full cost of attendance. So it's tuition, fees, and Duke's estimated cost of living for each year. And then our brand new one, so new, it's not even on our website yet, so we need to work on this coming summer, that I've worked for basically 11 years to get going, is we're calling it the Sanford Scholars Fellowship. And this is for me, it was specifically tied to folks who are committed to diversity and equity and inclusion. I feel like this is so important. It's something that I've worked really hard to improve at Duke and our MPP. So this was the first year we were able to offer up to 3 of these awards, which were full tuition and then a $15,000 living stipend, which again, should be enough to cover your cost of living here in Durham. We also have a LAD fellowship in education policy for those who are interested in ed policy. A lot of our folks are who did Teach for America or AmeriCorps, City Year, are interested in ed policy. That's often a good fellowship for them to apply to. That one is also full tuition and fees, and also a $15,000 living stipend as well. And then, so those are the 3 sort of special ones that have kind of that full cost of tuition plus a living stipend component. Aside from that, for folks who are interested in health policy and management, there's something called the Margolis Scholars Program at Duke. We've changed the funding a little bit over the years. We used to help fund this. They've shifted their application process. So this is now a separate app. Once you're admitted and you decide to enroll, then you can apply for this, some additional funding to help pay for like professional opportunities, conferences, you know, some help with a little bit of funding for that. And then for those who are interested in national security, we have what's called our Carlucci Fellowship, and that helps pay for the summer internship. So about like $5,000 towards the summer internship for those who are specifically interested in security issues. The Carlucci family provides this. They also host a very high profile special networking event that you get to meet folks you would normally get to meet in DC over the summer as a Carlucci fellow. So that's a really unique fellowship that we offer as well. And so those are specific to Duke and Sanford in our MPP program. I know you also asked about like other related organizations. So outside of Duke, you know, other ways that students can help pay for grad school and help fund that. So some of these we may have touched upon a little bit today, but certainly the Pickering and the Wrangell fellowships, there's a few State Department fellowships. These ones are specifically for folks interested in the Foreign Service, potentially working as a Foreign Service officer after and having that contract. So they both help to pay for grad school. You also have your job lined up for at least a few years after. So that works out really well for them. There's the Truman Scholarship, public service. You win about, I think it's 30,000 total towards graduate school. There's the U.S. Aid Payne Fellows that also help pay for grad school a little bit. And then aside from those, we haven't really mentioned yet, but there's like the PPIA Fellowship, Public Policy International Affairs. These are sort of summer institutes at a handful of APSIA schools that kind of host these often 6 to 8 week long summer institutes on site at their programs. These are really good preparation programs for these kinds of graduate school programs. They have economics and statistics components, things like coursework that will help prepare you for grad school. So that can be really helpful. And then, we have, specific to our school, we have these partnership organizations. I mentioned some like Teach for America, AmeriCorps, City Year, Peace Corps, military, we have Yellow Ribbon. A lot of for the folks who are fully funded that come to us, several of them are often from the military, either fully funded or half funded, and then we provide the other half. So there are so many different military programs out there that it sometimes can be a little hard to keep track of, but there are a lot out there. And then some employers have education benefits. So Deloitte is one that I've seen. And then if anyone is advising international students, some of our international students have some Fulbright funding that they bring with them as well. And then we help to supplement that a little bit. So some other places to look for funding as well.
Great. Jeanette or Adelaide, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, Jessica was very comprehensive with that. So I would say for us at Georgetown, our students usually are able to fund their education through a combination of these things. Usually they're combining 3 or 4 sources of income to make up for their tuition. So some have a little bit of savings, or they've worked for a little bit. They may bring in employer benefits. They use student loans, and they also apply to these external scholarships that she's mentioned. From our internal scholarships, I would say about 40% of our students receive some aid to attend MSFS, and the amount of aid ranges from about 20% to about 60%. We do have a handful of full tuition scholarships, but they are competitive, and so I wouldn't advise a student to apply with that goal of being their only source of funding. I always tell them that they should try to cast their net as wide as possible, so applying to these external scholarships while applying to our internal ones. So we do have a new scholarship that just launched this year that we call our Future Scholarship, which provides full tuition and a $20,000 stipend to a student who can contribute uniquely to the diversity of the college experience while at Georgetown. We also, through some of our institutes within the School of Foreign Service, offer scholarships. So one of them is our Institute of Study of Diplomacy, which is a center within the School of Foreign Service that works with a lot of former ambassadors and diplomats who do research and that kind of thing. So they do have a scholarship that offers 5 full tuition scholarships plus fees to students in any of the 8 programs in the School of Foreign Service who are interested in transformational public service, and using the broad term of public service. So it can be people who are looking to, transform education or, the foreign service, that kind of thing. And that has a separate application. And so students should be applying to us directly for our merit-based aid, but also looking within the school overall and the university, because there are other pockets of funding that are available that don't just come from the program.
Great. And Adelaide, I know you said that the PSLF doesn't apply to you at all, which makes sense since you're international. So for the student who's maybe looking to go abroad, are there some separate sources that they should consider?
So we actually work a lot with kind of B2B, so business to business agreements. So we have a lot of agreements for employees of certain organizations to come and study at discounted rates. So we have agreements with the World Bank, with the UN, with a lot of different UN agencies actually, and with the OECD. So a lot of students who even have worked as interns in some of these organizations have kind of a specialized admissions track where they're automatically considered for some of this aid just from the business to business agreements that we have as a university. Another scholarship, so I know probably everyone's familiar with Fulbright. Another option that is newer, but you guys might know the Eisenhower Fellowship. So Eisenhower Fellowships is typically for like mid-career professionals. They've just launched the Eisenhower Global Scholars Program, which is for young professionals. So this is an agreement for 2 students at IE and 2 students at Oxford that go for a year abroad and kind of round out their studies with an international experience. So it's the same kind of basis as Fulbright, where it's a tuition is fully covered, living expenses are funded, and then you do your final thesis kind of in conjunction with the organization, working with some of their mentors. So it's kind of a cool way to network and get kind of a leg up on your career hunt while you're still studying. We also do kind of front end and back end options. So front end would be kind of your traditional merit-based scholarships, which are all over our web. You can find, I would say, Europe doesn't typically have the same mentality towards scholarships as American students. So that's something important, I think, for advisors to take into account when they're preparing students for applications to European schools. Typically, a very high percentage scholarship here would be about 20 to 30%. So a lot of students, there's kind of that crash with expectations. Sometimes, because I know that the American financial aid system can be very, very generous. And so sometimes it's offensive sometimes for our American applicants to be offered a 20% scholarship, but really for us, that's an enormous award. So another good thing to keep in mind is kind of maybe some of those cultural differences between financial aid. And then, like Jessica mentioned earlier, also cost of living kind of is a big factor to take into account when you're thinking about, okay, how am I going to finance my studies? And then how am I going to eat while I study my master's degree? So we also have some back-end options, which are kind of those postgraduate fellowships. So we have a lot of MOUs with different agencies where we can kind of funnel our recent graduates straight into positions in the UN System Staff College, the UN DP, the UNHCR, the OECD, and the World Food Program. So we have a lot of our students that enter kind of with a mentality of wanting to work in international organizations. Maybe we can't offer a huge scholarship on the front end, but we can offer guaranteed remunerated internships at the back end, which can kind of help facilitate that transition into the professional space, which I know is scary sometimes for grad students. So that's something to take into account also is kind of, all right, how easy is it going to be for me to find a career afterwards and start maybe paying off some of the debt that I've accrued from grad school.
Well, thank you all so much. That was great information. And excuse me. I hope everyone was able to jot all of those things down and be able to share them with your students. I know we've got just a couple of minutes left. If there are any pressing questions from the audience, you can either drop those in the chat or if you would prefer to go faster, you can unmute yourself and just ask of our panelists. So I will take a look in the chat now just to make sure we don't have anything that has come through. I don't see anything right now, but I do want to say thank you again to our panelists, to Jeanette and Adelaide and Jessica. You all have provided a wealth of information today. And this is a topic that I know a lot of us are dealing with as advisors. You know, our students come in, they plop down, they want all these answers. So thank you so much for sharing all of your insights with us. And everyone is pleased. Lots of thank yous in the chat. So thank you all again. We will, I believe, have a recording of this, and Carmen will follow up with everyone regarding getting those out Tomorrow's session is, I believe, at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but that will be a session. Yay, okay, got it. That will be a session talking about APSIA as an organization and PISA and the resources that you all can have access to as a member of the PISA community. And so we hope to see you all there tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or whatever time zone that is for you. So thank you again to our panelists. Carmen, any final words? Oh, there is a poll. Yes. Please make sure that you fill that out for us. That would be tremendously helpful to help us gauge what sorts of information you all would like moving forward as we develop out the PISA community and how APSIA can best assist you as advisors who are doing this work every day. So please fill that out for us. Thank you all so much. Thank you again to our wonderful panelists. Very much appreciate your time this afternoon, and have a great evening, everybody.